Welcome to Politically Georgia from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. I'm Greg Bluestein here with Patricia Murphy. After nearly a quarter century under the Gold Dome, one of the most powerful women in Georgia politics is retiring. Speaker Pro Tem Jan Jones announced she would not seek re-election. She was first elected to public office in 2002 and as Speaker Pro Tem in 2010. She's the longest-serving Speaker Pro Tem in the U.S., Patricia.
That means that she is either a power player or a glutton for punishment or both. Yeah, she's a very, very important member down here at the state capitol. She also is one of the few who really does not seek press coverage for that. In fact, it's very difficult to get an interview with the Speaker Pro Tem. She is typically on the House floor, head down, reading a document or walking around among the Republican caucus, sharing a document, talking to people, probably twisting a few arms. I mean, she's a real power center. Wherever Jan Jones is where the action is. So I was really pleased that she sat down with us to talk about kind of her life, her legacy. She does not like the word legacy. A lot of people don't like that word. But I think our conversation with her really gave a lot of great insight into what she's been doing all these years when she has not been talking to the press.
And we're going to hear that conversation in a minute, but you also got the chance to sit down with her a couple of years ago, and you wrote a really profound column about her experience, how she rose through the ranks, her decisions to run for, not just, of course, for elected office, but run in a brutal, the politics within these caucuses can be really brutal. So it was no easy decision for her to decide to run for elected office within the caucus to be in a leadership position.
That's right. And also for these leadership roles, I mean, in her pro tem race, which is the job that she has now, she ran against 7 other Republicans, and those can be real dogfights. And so anybody who comes out on top of a 7-man battle, 6 men, 1 woman, it reminds me of a line from Speaker Nancy Pelosi that nobody gives you power, you have to take it. And so that is a great insight into what kind of political acumen, power source, powers of persuasion, and then just sheer grit it takes to win a race like that. This was not the GOP saying, oh, we should have a woman in leadership. No, Jan Jones put herself in leadership.
Yeah, she had to fight for it. It also reminds us of how much change we're going to see next year under the Gold Dome, because a lot of folks are either moving up, they're trying to run for higher office, or they're moving out, they're retiring.
Yeah.
And she's far from the only big name. State Representative Lynn Smith announced she also plans to step down from her seat and not seek another term. 30 years or so of elected office experience. So we're going to lose a lot of institutional knowledge under the Gold Dome.
Yeah, also the district that Jan Jones represents has changed enormously since she has represented it. She's up there in North Fulton. She was instrumental in creating the city of Milton, and that whole area has changed from sort of an exurb with significant rural areas to kind of a epicenter of like suburban politics in that northern arc. So she's been here for a ton of change, not just at the Capitol, but in her district. And then I would say kind of Republican politics writ large. And the direction that things are going, I think it does make many members who've been here for some time think, maybe now is the time for me to step aside.
Yeah, what's important to remember too is when you're a member of the General Assembly, you've got your constituents, but when you're in leadership posts, you have a different sort of constituents, and that's the members of your caucus and the members of the House. So Jan Jones's name might not be a household one for many people following Georgia politics, but she's a statewide figure in her own right, going around the state, talking about issues, developing proposals, and of course, trying to work to elect other members of the Republican caucus.
Yeah, and even though the legislature is in session just 3 months a year, if you're in the leadership for either of the parties, that is a 12-month job right there. And so when I talked to her right after she became the first female Speaker of the House, that happened after David Ralston passed away somewhat unexpectedly in office. She automatically became the Speaker because she was Speaker Pro Tem. She really was indicating, this is a full-time job. It's something that occupies 12 months a year, you have your caucus asking for your time. They need help with something. They want help with legislation. They want a special favor. They want you to come to a fundraiser. This is just constant. And even in those years, she had said that her family was starting to grow. She's starting to have grandchildren, and she felt like her family needed more of her, not less. And that played a pretty big part in her deciding not to seek the speakership position at that time. When she had been sort of automatically made speaker, she decided to step back and not run against John Burns for that spot.
We're now going to take you to our conversation with Speaker Pro Tem Jan Jones in her office.
Speaker Pro Tem Jan Jones, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me.
Of course. Well, we always watch you carefully on the floor because you typically have your head down. You're kind of the mover and shaker on the floor. We know that the action is happening wherever Ms. Jones is, but we want to talk to you today because you've announced that you are retiring at the end of the year after more than 20 years on the legislature.
That's right.
Tell us about your decision.
You know, I've thought about it for a while, and I finally came to the conclusion that if I waited, assuming the voters supported this, if I waited until I was no longer interested in the issues and changing things to make it better, that I would not leave walking. Mm-hmm. I would leave feet first. And so I decided to put that aside and just think about what do I want the next few years to look like. And it didn't include going to meetings all the time and spending 3 months here. If that was all I was making my decision on was, how was I going to spend my time? And so that, along with my family, who have been very supportive and patient, I could tell that they were ready for me to have more unstructured time, more uncommitted time. And so between the two, that's how I made my decision.
Because you have 4 adult children and you've just told us 4.5 grandchildren.
That's right.
Now.
That's right. And they're all little. And someone's always sick. And so that'll be a greater part of my life after I leave. It won't be the only part, but I'll be more available, which is important.
So is there a personal legacy that you hope Georgians remember, that you hope you're remembered for as you take your next step?
I'm not one of these people who really thinks about, what are people going to remember me for? What am I going to remember me for is kind of what matters to me. Because I think of myself as more of a behind-the-scenes kind of person, and I think that's a good way to be. Don't worry about who gets credit, just worry about, did it happen? And so for me, what did I want to do? I didn't know this when I came in. I didn't know anything when I came in. Truly clueless. But what has mattered the most to me is making a difference for children and young people to have more opportunities to live the life that would be best for them. And so the way that ended up, it is best to be in the legislature. You want to be a generalist and a specialist. If you're only a generalist, I find you get very little done. If you're only a specialist, you don't have the broader perspective. Mm-hmm. And so what I kind of fell into specializing in, and maybe that was because it was just my interest, is pre-K, K through 12, and higher ed. And so I look at what I'm working on this year, which will be my last legislative year. I'm strengthening I have a bill to strengthen the opportunities for kids at risk of dropping out. And I've been working on that for about 5 years so that my goal is that every child in Georgia for whom a traditional setting doesn't work or hasn't worked for them, that they have a what we now call completion school that they can attend to finally get their degree. And it doesn't matter to me if they graduate on time. That's for superintendents to worry about. What matters to me is, do they cross the line? So I've got that. I am trying one last time to bolster our pre-K. We've had declining enrollment for 10 years, despite a growing state. And so in looking at what are some of the structural or funding problems that are contributing to that, I'm going to work to get money in the big budget so that pre-K teachers for the first time will have 5 personal days of leave. We do not fund that now. And I'm also expanding a program for children who've had no exposure to any kind of formal learning, or that I call it the pre-K program. It's an intensive summer program, the summer before pre-K. And then I'm in a whole lot of other things, but those are the kinds of things I'm working on. And that, so if there's anything I want to remember me for, I'll know what I did, and I do believe it'll make a difference for kids.
So one thing you'll certainly be remembered for is the history that you made. You were the first female Speaker of the House in Georgia history. That happened when Speaker of the House David Ralston passed away very unexpectedly, and I think left people all in the Capitol across state of Georgia in a complete state of shock. And you automatically became the Speaker because of the way the Georgia Constitution is written, and it really fell upon you to sort of guide the caucus forward and guide the House forward in his in the kind of the wake of his death. What was that time like for you, and how do you look back on those days?
It did kind of jolt the caucus in the House. Within about 48 hours, what I came to the conclusion with a couple other sort of senior members, including the Speaker today, John Burns, is that I wanted to continue in the role I was in and have constancy there. And I like the role that I have more flexibility to work on issues and to support members without having to do all the things that the Speaker has to do. And I supported John Burns to be the Speaker. But I could, while he prepared to become what was, the most likely result on the first day of session, I could just run the office and make a few appointments that needed to be made, try to wrap up loose ends, because the Speaker had been sick for a while, although we were still all shocked when he sadly passed away. But I do want to mention that what I think of myself being known for more is being the first female Speaker pro tem, because I did run in a field of 7.
It's a very powerful post in this.
16 years ago. And at a time where, we just had never had a female majority leader, pro tem, Speaker, and I in fact, this will now be 24 years I had been here, I had never seen a female hold the gavel, much less stand up there and preside. And so for me personally, I found when I talk to members or I talk to women or young girls, students, I talk about that path to rise to elected office, which is an elected position among the caucus in the House. It was a harder path and one I frankly take more personal pride in.
And you're the longest serving House Speaker pro tem in the nation.
That's right, which tells you how long people want to do this. Not too long, but that is right.
What's the hardest lesson you learned during that campaign, that internal campaign for that post, because as Patricia mentioned, it's very powerful. It's not necessarily you see in the papers, and not necessarily as front and center as the speaker, but it's an immensely important position.
I learned that people respect hard work, not who takes the most credit for it, but who actually does the work. And I think I felt that I was always a very hard worker from the time I came in, and I saw a lack of informing the caucus on issues, and so I sort of took it upon myself to be the purveyor of information on education, higher education, for a few years. And then when I ran for whip, and I was the whip for a year, and I took it very seriously, read every bill, personally wrote every report to the caucus, and if you work hard and you do a reasonably good job, people notice it. That really, I'm probably not the first person you think of to go have a beer with. I don't think I'm the last person that you think of to go have a beer with, but I'm probably not the first person you think of to go have a beer with. And so people respect hard work.
Senator John Albers, who was one of your colleagues in the Fulton delegation, also told me that you are considered by most people as the mother of Milton, meaning you played a huge role in creating the city of Milton and sort of setting the example of other cities, new cities around the state, especially the metro area, to come have more self-governance for themselves as well. And he feels like that'll be one of the biggest pieces that you be behind.
That was one of the harder things I did. And it was, convincing people who knew me here, didn't know me in the community, that the question always would come up about, well, do we need more government? And I had to develop a sort of a way of explaining that more governments doesn't mean more government. That what people are looking for out of their government is one that's answerable to them, that they have some elected influence. And it's hard to have that when you're in a county of 1 million people. And so that was what I was selling, was how to have more elected influence and not feel like it just meant more government intruding in your life. And it's so interesting now looking back, because it was quite partisan at the time, the vote on the floor and the whole debate on it. In retrospect now, almost 20 years later, it's not partisan at all. In fact, the vote in Cobb County, there were 4 cityhood efforts at once, and the only one that passed was a Democrat majority city. And so it's not about that. It's just people, within reason, obviously, they want to feel that their community matters, they have a sense of community, and that there are people that they can call on, whether they get their way or not, that will at least listen to them.
Speaker, I want to go back to something you said earlier. When you said when you were first elected, you didn't see women in leadership positions, let alone holding a gavel. How do you think the landscape has changed in the last couple decades? And what else do you think needs to happen under the Gold Dome to keep changing that landscape?
Well, I do think it has changed, just in what people expect. The same with running for office. 20, 30 years ago, I can remember people saying, well, I don't think people are ready for a female representative or whatever. And so I actually did a little analysis on it, because I had been called by I don't remember the publication, and they wanted to know why there weren't, for example, more women Republicans in elected office. And so I looked at over about a decade of when women ran for office, whether it was a Republican or Democrat, how often were they the ones in the primary to prevail? And it was more often than not, it was the female that prevailed. So it isn't that people don't want to elect a female. Just fewer females, at least in my party, tend to run. Some of that is geography. They tend to, Republicans in Georgia, remember, you can only look at your state. That's not true in other states. In our state, they tend to live further away from the capital. And so sometimes, women will wait until their kids are a little older, frankly, older than mine were. Mine were really quite young. It was hard to do. And, but I don't think people think as much now male, female, it's just who's the right person. Mm-hmm. Your gender isn't an impediment, and it isn't the first thing people necessarily notice. What they want to know is, do you work hard? Do you reflect? Are you open-minded? And do you generally reflect their perspective?
Yeah, and generally politics has changed towards women generally, but here at the state capitol, you're the only woman I see with a gavel in her hand in the House or the Senate, and it still feels very, very male-dominated, almost a boys' club. Walking around and seeing who's here, there are more women, but even more so than in the U.S. Capitol. It feels to me.
Does it?
It does. It still feels like it's a higher hill for women than for men in leadership. Do you feel that way?
I don't feel like it's a higher hill. I really don't. I do believe in the majority party today there are fewer women running for office, and but that is changing. We now have, out of 7 elected leadership positions in the Georgia House, 3 are women. And with the election of Sue Hong most recently. And if you look at the chairman, I haven't actually looked at the numbers, but I would predict if you would analyze it, they're overrepresented relative to the number that are in the majority party. And so one thing I will be working, just as one of many things, but kind of on the side, when I leave office, will be encouraging other women, conservative women, to run for office, and how to be a resource to them as to how do you fit this into your life, and how do you make it work.
So with your retirement, what advice do you have for young people, but particularly women, who are looking at a career in politics?
Well, I guess as I have met and will meet with women, I like to get to know what's their motivation, and you want to dig deep. Are you looking to be something or do something? And now, if you're looking to do something, there are many ways to do something outside of elected office. But if that appeals to someone, then they need to get their life in order. Their logistical, just as in your life and your life, their logistical ramifications. And is their family going to be supportive? If they have children, is their husband supportive? I couldn't have done it if I didn't have a husband that was willing to, do the soccer pool or soccer run when I couldn't. And I would encourage them to not just listen to the loud few voices, but try to train themselves to hear the silent majority. Because the silent majority will never come down to the Capitol. They'll never write you or text you, or rarely, but they, that's who you represent.
Well, that sounds like advice for everybody. Well, listen, Speaker Pro Tem Jan Jones, congratulations on your decision.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for your time today.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
That was our conversation with Speaker Pro Tem Jan Jones. When we come back, our takeaways from that conversation. This is Politically Georgia from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Welcome back to Politically Georgia. I'm Greg Bluestein here with Patricia Murphy. A reminder, if you have a question you'd like to ask us here on Politically Georgia, you can call the Politically Georgia call-in hotline anytime, day or night. Leave a question and we'll play it back and answer your question right here on the show during our Monday mailbag segment. The number is 770-810-5297. That's 810-5297. Patricia, we just came back from our discussion with House Speaker Pro Tem Jan Jones, who talked a little bit about her legacy, but you can see her personality shining through in terms of, she's not someone who wants the spotlight, who wants the limelight of being, talked about in shows like this, all over the news, all over the headlines. She's very much behind the scenes lawmaker.
Yeah, really known as a workhorse, not a show horse, like very nitty gritty into the details of legislation and issues, especially education issues. So when she talked about what she was going to remember about her own tenure, the bills that she's been able to pass, the policy that she's been able to move on education in particular, I was not at all surprised to hear her say that that's what she was going to remember. I do think what jumped out to me, two things. Number one was that she said she'd never seen a woman hold a gavel. That was wild. And that sort of tells you the environment that she came into as a new female member in the Republican caucus and then eventually seeking leadership. You have to do something that's never been done before. And that makes it just inherently harder than just doing the thing itself. So that jumped out at me. And it has changed a lot. I think I said, well, it doesn't change that much. I don't see many other women. There are not other women with the gavel, by the way, House or Senate side, but it has changed in her time, partially because of her time, honestly. The second thing that she said was that it meant more to her to be the first female pro tem than it did to be the first speaker, because as we mentioned earlier, like becoming the first female pro tem, that took a lot of work.
A lot of grit.
A lot of learning about the real deal of politics down here at the state capitol, which isn't always pretty. And then she still came out the winner. And so you could tell the pride she had taken in that achievement.
Yeah, a lot of internal and external politicking, traveling around the state, doing things that will never be something that we talk about or write about, like going to fundraisers in Hahira, you name it, like doing all those things. That matters. That matters to the members of her caucus and, of course, the policies that she pushes or the policies she decides not to push, right? That's just as telling. A big part of her job and any other leader in either of those chambers' job is also to play defense, right? To be a safety valve against policies and proposals that might be more harmful than good.
Now that you mention that, I can think of multiple bills down here at the state capitol that did not go anywhere. And the reason was because behind the scenes, Jan Jones didn't want it to go anywhere. So she certainly had her heavy, strong influence, not just on what happens, but on what doesn't happen. So my question for you, Greg, since I consider you an expert, what kind of vacuum does this create? Who do you see wanting to step into that leadership role? Is there this new generation of young Republicans sort of looking to grab that? Or are there veterans who have been like, you know what, I've been on the sidelines too long? Yeah,
there are some veterans who have been sort of, quote unquote, waiting their turns. There's also plenty of lawmakers that are just fine being committee chairs, right? And in a sense, holding not as much power, but their own sort of powers without having to worry about internal caucus politics after the session ends in April, right? Who can continue being XYZ chair of Judiciary, Appropriations, Ways and Means, you name it. But there are also a group of up-and-coming House lawmakers. One I'm watching really closely, I think everyone is Sue Hong, who already has a leadership post and could continue to rise. And, of course, we also talk about Chuck Strachan, a House Majority Leader, who could be talked about as the next speaker when John Burns decides to hang up his gavel. So there are younger groups of lawmakers who are, looking to make a bigger mark as well.
So
what
interesting.
About you?
So, no, I completely agree with you. Sue Hong is somebody who has been on sort of like Republican leaders' radar since the moment she ran for her Gwinnett seat. And she was one of the governor's floor leaders as a freshman. And so that really tells you the amount of trust that they had in Sue Hong early on. And then also the level to which they wanted to put her forward as a leader, somebody who's in one of those Northern Arc suburban seats for Republicans. Really, that is the power center for Republicans. They cannot lose control of those Northern Arc seats, or else they're going to be in a whole world of trouble and maybe lose control of the House in the process. So she's somebody who, for sure, and Chuck Strachan, of course, I think he's sort of, people see him as sort of not a speaker in waiting, because that connotes that he's just like waiting for John Burns to go somewhere. But he certainly is the trusted right hand of the speaker and is somebody who has put himself forward for leadership, and he's been very successful so far. So I think both of them for sure have legs.
One thing that was interesting too from our conversation with Jan Jones is she's not going to kind of ride off into the sunset.
No.
She still wants to be very involved, but particularly with recruiting young conservative women to run for office. So I think we're going to hear a lot more from her on that front.
Yeah, she also said, I said, well, your family is growing. She said, yeah, but that's not all I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be doing other things. And when we were off mic, I don't think this is anything that's a secret. She told us that one of the best trips she ever took was somewhat recently. Mm-hmm. She climbed Mount Kilimanjaro with her husband, her son, and her son's wife. So that sort of gives you an idea of what Republicans have had down there in their sort of leadership toolbox is a grandma hiking Mount Kilimanjaro. That is who Jan Jones is, was, and will continue to be.
Do you think your kids would ever invite you to hike Mount Kilimanjaro with them when you're older and they're older?
I just want them to invite me to dinner.
Oh, I'm okay with that too.
But I would say yes to Kilimanjaro.
I would say yes in a heartbeat. Let's just see if they ask me. I'm waiting for them to ask Nicole and Brooke.
I don't know. You've got that TikTok account, Greg, that's deeply embarrassing to your children. I'm not sure. You're going to have to, you might have to moderate TikTok before you get invited to Kilimanjaro.
For our listeners, it's Yo, it's your boy Blue, and I cannot post anything without them first approving it, but they still hate it.
And let me answer the one question I always get about it. Is this thing real? Yes, it is.
Yes, it is. Unfortunately, it's very real. Well, that's going to do it for today's edition of Politically Georgia. If you value smart, Georgia-focused political analysis, follow, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast platform, and share the show with someone who follows the Gold Dome as closely as you do. We'll talk to you next time on the Politically Georgia podcast from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution.
Thanks for listening to the Politically Georgia podcast. Our executive producer is Shane Backler. AJC's head of audio is Sam Stamler. Production support from our partners at Goat Rodeo, including Kara Schillen, Hazel Hoffman, and Max Johnston. For more of our political coverage, visit ajc.com/politicallygeorgia, and we invite you to support local journalism by subscribing to the AJC. Join us again next time on Politically Georgia from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution.